Director of Friends of the Bitterroot, a grassroots conservation group that is really not about recreation. What we're about is ecosystem health. It's the foundation for our lives and all the lives of the residents in the woods. Here in the Bitterroot, we were formed in 1986. We've only ever stopped one timber sale, and that was this proposed salvage. I pointed out that fire that started at a home, and they were wanting to do that under a categorical exclusion. We told them no, it's not legal. Judge Malloy, over a weekend, 3 days, he made a ruling. You can't do that. Clearly, you can't do that. Otherwise, we've never stopped a timber sale. We have neither appealed nor litigated a timber sale on this forest for 8 years. Nobody has appealed or litigated a timber sale on this forest for 8 years. The last time we did was the Middle East Fork timber sale, and it went on ahead in spite of our efforts. So that's just a little background. And I should say that, it's like my background. I've worked as a geologist for the mineral exploration mining industry. I've worked in the woods for the timber industry. So I'm well aware of the need for developing natural resources. I have a really strong passion that it be done with the utmost care. And so that's just a little background, and I'm here, just my role kind of as being a conservationist is like skunk at the Sunday school picnic, in this group, we're called obstructionists. I like to think of it as a guardrail. Are guardrails obstructing? Well, yeah, but for good reason. I'd like to, say that as a organization, and I'm only speaking as an individual, I can't speak for Friends of the Bitterroot. It's non-hierarchical. We make decisions by consensus. Nobody can speak for the whole group. But basically, we believe in science, law, and democratic process in managing public forests. And when it comes to science, I will say that I believe science is necessary but not sufficient. Science can never understand what I believe is a miracle. Nature, to me, I'm not waiting for anybody to walk on water. Just look around. There's so many parts that have to work together, not just in the beginning, but every day. They have to synchronize and work together. So I believe that even the best science will never fully understand the forest. And so active management necessarily involves unforeseen consequences. And so, but we believe that, nature has a way, just the ability to regenerate is amazing. Nature will regenerate in an incredibly site-specific, we talk about adaptive management. Natural regeneration is really exquisitely adapted, amazingly site-specific. Nature doesn't plant the wrong kind of tree in the wrong place, or if it does, it doesn't make it. So basically, we believe that humility and prudence is a really important ingredient when management enters, and we most of the time believe that nature can manage itself. Lewis and Clark came through this valley. These forests were the best forests the Bitterroot's ever seen was in the day of Lewis and Clark, where there had been no management. All of the biomass returned to the soil either as wood or ash, and it was building up the soil. So the productivity of the forest, which depends on the soil, it was there was no removal of biomass, and yet there were large fires. There was never any salvage logging after those large fires, and we got some beautiful forests out of the deal. In our view, it's been kind of downhill since, both with the, and by forest we mean not just the trees. It's like the whole picture, the fish, the wildlife, the workable hydrology, everything's part of the forest. So, you know, science, and like we have noticed over the years, that science can often be misused, abused, and most of the disconnect, I would say, has to do with cutting timber. Granted, the Forest Service is in a really difficult position. They're supposed to manage for a healthy ecosystem and get the logs out. Well, that's almost insurmountable dilemma, and the way it's done leads to some real misuse of good science. So, you know, and another thing I believe in, this is, oh God, here I am, the skunk at the picnic, but, you know, I think I call it the management paradigm. People who go to school and get trained in management just have, it's like any paradigm, like, it's like a fish doesn't notice the water. A paradigm's a way of thinking that usually you don't even know you're thinking that way. We conservationists have, you know, a different paradigm. Anyway, management paradigm, I think, it's like it needs to be managed, you know? It's like if it's your job, you need to feel needed. And so I think some of what I would consider over-management has to do with this management paradigm that gets drilled in, and you can see it sometimes where you know, it's in various ways, especially, you know, around fire, because fire is so emotional and really gets the public's attention, and so the managers have a spotlight on them and they got to do something, you know, so that can lead to problem. Restoration, after this Bitterroot, well, I should say that almost every restoration project on this forest, there is a recent exception, proposed restoration project, that does not include logging. You know, if you mention restoration project on this forest, there's going to be a logging component to it. And in our view, a lot of times that's kind of like the main focus, is get some more timber cut. Now, for example, like on kind of overzealous, I believe, restoration, there was this Cow Creek demonstration project up above Pinesdale after the 2000 fires, and it's, you know, it was meant easy access to the public, and they got in there early on, and they planted a bunch of pea pine sap or starts, whatever, in amongst a bunch of naturally regenerating Doug fir, so that they basically instantly recreated this conifer in, you know, bonsai form, miniature form, instantly recreated the conifer encroachment situation. Now I'm going to get into, I need to be careful of my wording, but here's an example of what we think is pretty darn misleading. You can find this out in front of the SO office. There's a sequence of photographs from Lick Creek. The first one is, it's hard to see here, but it's been logged. It basically, the wording has changed over time. Hopefully due to some of the pressure. We believe it was very misleading, because the first picture you see is a logged over forest, and then it starts to demonstrate conifer encroachment due to fire suppression. Actually,
do you want to pass that around?
sure. One of the photos that you really never see, except on the cover of Steve Arno's report, is what that forest looked like before it was logged. You don't see this on the Bitterroot anymore. That is not an open park-like stand. That's a ponderosa pine stand that the likes of which we'll never see again. And I was really actually heartened to see the progress in the wording. This I picked this up in the supervisor's office, and to date this is the most honest depiction of the use of this series of Lick Creek photos that I've seen to date. It actually says on this first photo about half the large pines were harvested before this photo was taken. I mean, why is this picture that is going around not included in this sequence? Well, it's because there's a real, it's often used, this open park-like ponderosa stand is used to justify a whole lot of logging. And you know, I mean, that just makes me sad when I see that picture. It's like, that was incredible. That's just inspirational to be in a stand like that. Anyway, I would like to see in the future an even more honest depiction, which would include that photograph. I mean, you could eliminate one of these three, which all basically show different stages of conifer encroachment, just getting more and more dense. Well, hell, you know, how much information is in there? Whereas the information in this original photo before logging, there's enormous amount of information in there.
Larry, I've got to
I'm sure.
give you some qualification on that. That photo that's on the cover that's so dense, we have no idea what focal length lens that was. If it was a telephoto focus lens, you can take a picture of an open stand with a telephoto, it'll come out looking like that, number one. Number two, it wasn't included in any sequence because nobody could ever find the location of it again. All of these other photo comparisons, the original photo location was duplicated. So we don't know where that photo was taken, and we've looked for it, but we can't, there's no way of finding it.
I think, first of all, there's people in both photos, the pre-logging and the 1909 after logging. Also, I would say that it looks to me like there's a very distinctive large tree that you can see in that original pre-logging paper and follow it through. You know,
Jack Lazinski, a whole bunch of other people have poured over those sites going back to I think it was 1927 when they went to try to relocate those photo points. And they couldn't relocate that one.
But even if it's not the exact spot, isn't conceptually there's some information in that pre-logging photo that basically, I mean, I thank you for the clarification, but I gotta believe that there's some kind of mind bending going on in order to give the public an image of these open park-like stands. You know, even if it's not, maybe put a caption on there, exact location not known, but
focal length of lens not known. There are many photographs from northern Arizona of it where we happen to have a lot of pre-harvest photographs, considered to be the largest, most arguably beautiful ponderosa pine forest in North America, and they were mostly open, and there we have those photographs.
Oh yeah, no, I do believe that there are. I mean, I've worked in the Gila. There's open park-like ponderosa, and it's probably, possibly, even the most common. I guess my point is, you know, I want to say that sometimes science can be bent or, you know, partial information, but I appreciate your criteria for not including.
And I'll agree, science can be bent and distorted. There's no doubt about that.
And I got more examples.
Okay, Larry, we got 3 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm
let's-
all for the debate, but I want to make sure you get to say everything you want to say before we have
Okay,
to leave, which is
I'll talk about the the timber project that Marilyn talked a little bit about this morning. After this fires, there was a proposed burned area restoration project that proposed 271 million board feet of logging on a burned forest. So we immediately dredged up the Bescher report. If you do, I'm not familiar with the Bescher report, I highly recommend it. It talks about the problems with salvage logging on a burned forest. Obviously, the soils are very vulnerable, but that project, which was reduced, that was the draft, was 271 million. It was, in my view, the people in this valley were very fearful. I know I was. Oxygen deprivation, thick smoke for weeks on end. And then here comes a really concerted campaign of propaganda to manufacture consent for a big, huge salvage logging timber sale, basically saying that, oh, if you think this fire was bad, wait till these trees drop and the next fire comes through. Well, I don't believe there's any science for that, except certain, like maybe lodgepole up high, but the Starr McIver report, which consolidated a lot of science. So anyway, that the chief of the Forest Service turned the decision from decision maker on the forest over to the Secretary of Agriculture in hopes that the decision could not be appealed, because there's no requirement by the Secretary of Agriculture. If he was the decision maker, that Malloy, the judge, immediately said, no, you can't do that. So anyway, we went to court, a bunch of groups, had a settlement agreement. And it was very difficult for me because I settled for a bunch of salvage logging in my backyard. I mean, I was literally in tears in the courtroom, but willing to make concessions, because what we wanted to do was keep the salvage logging out of the most sensitive fishery streams and out of the roadless areas. And there was this big sweetener, which was $25 million for the restoration part of the settlement package, which included a lot of road restoration. So man, I just, bit my lip and signed away. Well, within weeks, there $18 million of that 25 million was taken away to cover fire suppression elsewhere across the United States. It was like, man, we felt like that was a contract. The judge, it was a court-ordered, mediated settlement. We thought that was a contract. How can you be taking that away? Well, it has slowly come back, and apparently I learned from Marilyn today that we're almost there, but we're not quite there. So 14 years later, and the erosion, from the fire is about over in, I guess, 3 years for the most part. The erosion on these roads is chronic, day in, day out, every year. So it's not like that was just put on hold until the money showed up. We got burned big time on that project.
Can I have that?
Okay.
Larry is on the car, and you can ask questions.
Yeah, Friends of the Bitterroot is a genuinely grassroots organization, about 26 years old, and it's non-hierarchical. We make decisions with a steering committee of 8 to 12 people, and our membership has been, well, we're over 300 now, and we started back about when it was about 87 or so, and same time as a lot of grassroots forest watch organizations in Montana. In the beginning, we basically decided that we would stick to good science and best available science, that we're not opposed to logging per se, and that we would use the available process that's provided by NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, to do what we could to keep forest management kind of on track. And we in the beginning had a couple of lawsuits over on the Beaverhead, primarily aimed at protecting water quality. Fisheries included one issue where we insisted that they start to analyze the impacts on biological corridors from their projects, which we won both of those lawsuits and helped to kind of begin to see this analysis of impacts and biological corridors, which are very key. We're surrounded by wildlands here, and we still have all the wildlife that was here when Lewis and Clark came through. Them bison don't often wander through, but just about everything else does. Anyway, and then through the years we have appealed and litigated on the Bitterroot Forest. We appealed and litigated the burned area recovery project, which was enormous. In the beginning it was proposed 271 million board feet, as much as they had logged in the previous about 8 years. And we also appealed and litigated the Middle East Fork timber sale. We've been called, we haven't appealed or litigated really any projects here or on nearby forests for the last 8 years. We believe we've been making some headway simply through doing our homework, offering comments to the draft and scoping, and I think that it took a while, but I think to actually make an impact on the Forest Service project, you need to not only have your facts right, but you need to have a credible threat of litigation. And once you satisfy those two requirements, then you can start getting them to modify projects, prior to the need of going to court. And we've been called all kinds of names, but a common one is that we're called obstructionists, and we don't see it that way. We believe we serve the role of a guardrail, which I guess obstructs vehicles from going into the canyon, and it, protects lives, and that's what we see our role as being. If we were obstructionists, we would have been appealing and litigating everything that came our way. But at any rate, lately, we've been involved with the Bitterroot Restoration Committee, the Ravalli County Resource Advisory Committee, and I don't know where it's going to go from here, because this latest Farm Bill forestry provisions basically does away with the public process. The public has largely been taken out of the any role, really meaningful role in managing public lands. The public's been removed in the interest of getting the cut out, timber cutting. So it's hard to tell where we go from here. They say that the courts are still open and the forest plans are still enforceable, but the only way we were ever, in order to win in court or win an appeal, you have to have your facts about impacts. And the way we could get those facts in the past is from the draft EA or draft EIS. Well, there's no more drafts. They're going to use this thing called a categorical exclusion, which is a very sketchy, minimal look before you leap. And so we would probably be largely unable to garner enough facts on the impacts to win in court. We'll see. My feeling is that it's more than ever, it's going to be up to conscientious, professional, I call them ologists, but the specialists within the Forest Service, the hydrologists, geologists, whatever, to basically stand up and insist that the resource that they specialize in and hopefully care about is protected. In the past, it seems that they've been able, to a certain degree, to hide behind these citizen forest watch efforts and have some reasonable expectation that the resource that they hopefully care about would be protected. Well, we've been sidelined for the most part, and I don't know how many ologists are left. A lot of them have turned into prostitutes. There's a lot of specialists that just give the Forest Service what they want to hear in order to keep their job and reach retirement age. So anyway, going forward, we'll see what the role for Citizen Forest Watch is. It's largely been neutralized by the Farm Bill politics, basically. Well, politics hand in hand with the timber industry, who's managed to buy the politicians. Corporate influence is rampant everywhere.
Change, or it's just that what's going to happen and things will adapt.
Mm-hmm.
So this ecosystem that experienced these fires in 2000, the systems are coming back in some fashion. But 14 years later, if the same event happened, would it be different because of the increase in climate change?
Mm-hmm.
Back, where is this heading? I guess.
Yeah.
In your opinion.
Well, I think that prior to the 2000 fires, dating way back when, that the management of the Bitterroot Forest in the interest of getting the timber out reduced the resistance to fire. I mean, the best available science says that when you log either selectively or clear cut, that basically you open up the forest floor and it becomes hotter, drier, and it allows the wind to come through. The Forest Service, and even prior to the Forest Service, the logging has been selectively removing the most fire-resistant trees. That is, especially the big pine that have evolved and adapted to fire, thick bark, kind of no limbs for a ways, and they're very resistant to fire. Well, those are the preferred species that gets logged, and that's really the component of this forest that has been hurt the most, is the large, especially ponderosa pine. And so the resilience of this forest to climate change, you don't have to be a scientist. Just go stand out in a recently logged area and you can feel that it's warmer and drier, and you can feel the wind blow. And so those are the same things that are going to decrease the resilience of a forest to climate change, is because climate change causes things to get hotter and drier, and there's more wind. So this century or more of management has basically, it's reduced the resilience to climate change, it's reduced the resistance to fire. When you see these logging trucks going out, they're carrying big logs. If you go into a burned area, what's left? The only thing left are the big tree trunks. That's the last thing to burn. And yet that's what they're focused on. There's all kinds of manipulation of science to try to, cover up the fact that they're basically just going after the big timber. We haven't seen a timber sale on the Bitterroot Forest here that's called a timber sale project for more than 10 years, it's always about restoration. It's always about fear of fire. They've learned to couch what they do in terms of fire. You know, and they got the money for, I mean, the biggest ad campaign, I've heard it's most successful ever in America, is only you can prevent forest fire, Smokey the Bear. Well, that's untrue. It's not only false, we weren't able to prevent the 2000 fires, and it's finger pointing. Someone is to blame. And that finger got pointed, and still is pointed, to the Citizen Forest Watch people. And so it's wrong that only you can prevent forest fire is wrong on so many counts. The politicians have learned to capitalize on it. So I think, you know, climate change, given that we see hardly any recognition from policymakers that it's real, so they're losing the opportunity to potentially mitigate, minimize the damage from climate change. If they wanted to start helping to build the resilience of the forest here in the Bitterroot and elsewhere, knowing that climate change is coming, that policies are missing, you know, one thing they could do is quit taking the big trees. Like, leave whatever we've got left of, especially of large ponderosa pine, but even large Doug fir, you know, leave them. I mean, even potentially go so far as to protect these ancient heritage pine and fir by raking out the duff, the needle accumulation that's occurred over all these years of fire suppression. Maybe take out the conifer encroachment underneath them, but focusing on the big trees that are left to protect them one by one. You know, don't try to get anything commercial out of it. There hadn't been a money made on a timber sale probably ever here, but certainly as long as Friends of Bitterroot's been around, you know, over 25 years, they lose money on every timber sale. You know, you'll hear stuff like, well, the money we make from this timber, we're going to spend it on restoration. You're not going to make money on this timber sale. The timber sale is costing you, and the restoration costs. The timber sale causes damage. The restoration starts to help repair some of the damage from the past. So we would advocate, you know, protecting these legacy large trees and try to rebuild the resilience in the forest.
Let's see. In on Friday that you heard that you wanted to comment about or address in a slightly different way than is presented?
Yeah, it's like actually, oh, the cameras.
The camera's going, yeah.
Yeah. I failed to make some of the points that I would like to, like I wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, the abuse of science, and in almost every instance the abuse of science is used to increase the timber harvest, and especially direct it towards the big trees. One thing after the 2000 fires, they asked this PhD scientist, James Brown, famous for his scientific work, they asked him to make recommendations in terms of, they call it coarse woody debris that's left on the forest floor. And it's like they defined coarse woody debris as being fuels. Everything's made of wood as fuels, of 3 inches and less, and so his study kind of basically confirmed what they were looking for because of the definition, the sideboards they put on the study that they hired him to do. it's like, yeah, 3 inches and less helps to feed the soil rot on the forest floor. But in a public meeting, I asked him, well, isn't there a huge difference between, a 3 to 6 inch, branch and a 36-inch tree? And he goes, oh yeah, the 36-inch tree is far more ecologically valuable and far less of a fire hazard. But his study was so configured in such a way that information was in a blind spot. And actually, truth be told, the component of this forest that would be hardest to replace are standing snags, big standing trees. Because I don't know how many little saplings you would have to plant to get one big standing tree. Lots would die on the way. And then there's lots of ways for big standing trees to die. The most common is a chainsaw, but also they can blow down, or in a fire they can burn up and fall down. So a standing snag after a fire on this forest is probably impossible. It's not replaceable in my view. And yet that's what they're going after in their salvage timber sale, is like just, cutting down these big standing snags, which that's not sustainable. They'll never come back. And I guess in terms of, like after the fire and their recovery efforts, the instinct of a manager is to, we got to get this forest growing again. And they want to recreate it, by they're planting, like I mentioned, the Cow Creek demonstration where they had to get in there and plant. So they planted ponderosa pine, and it was, must have been a couple years after the fire, because there was a bunch of little Doug fir naturally regenerating. They went in and planted these pine seedlings from a nursery in amongst all those little Doug fir, instantly recreating this conifer encroachment problem that they're so fond of bringing up. And there they just did it because they couldn't resist the management paradigm. Well, with climate change, and with what you can see, the natural regeneration in many cases is really just isn't happening. The trees aren't coming back. And so if the Forest Service had, bottomless pockets, my guess is they'd be out there planting ponderosa pine and, essentially forcing their view of what's supposed to happen on to nature. I think that what needs to happen with climate change, we don't know, if this is going to be stand conversion. I mean, if there were pinyon and juniper seed nearby, I would expect that we would probably see those types of trees taken over, because they can grow where it's much drier. I would not recommend that. I think at this point, given this unfortunate turn of events that we're failing to deal with, climate change, is the best we could do is just remove whatever impediments there might be to natural healing. In the case of, trees and what the forest would naturally convert to, I don't know, but I think we should just back off and find out. Nature knows how to take care of itself far better than people do. A lot of this management, and especially restoration, is simply forcing some preconceived model onto nature, potentially creating more problems. Another thing is this idea of prescribed burning. I mean, just on the face of it, they want to prescribe burn in the spring because who wants to light a fire out there in the fall? So here they are dropping ping pong balls out of helicopters, drip torches in the spring. These forests, meaning more than just the trees, I mean the birds, the animals, the little plants, the fungus, the everything. And this, because the natural way is that things regenerate in the spring. You know, the ground nesting birds are having their nests and hatching out chicks. Ground nesting animals, or you know, all the regeneration, not all, but most of it is happening in the spring. And so they're trying to, reduce the fuels by prescribed burning in the spring. Well, you know, we've seen plenty of examples where they have damaged ecosystems more or less broadly with ill-conceived management notions. In my view, prescribed burning in the spring is fraught with potential unintended consequences. And it is also prone to being able to overlay that ill-conceived model over a very broad landscape. You know, I mean, cows have done a number, damaged ecosystems very broadly, because you just kick them out and they just wander around and do their dirty deed. But with prescribed burning, hell, one match, and you can, in the spring, you can really manage a lot of acres in a short period of time. So by the time, finally they get around to monitoring and finding out what are the unintended consequences, there's a high likelihood that there's a lot of unintended consequences damaging everything but the trees, which is all they really focus on. And there's a high likelihood or high potential of it being overlaid across a very large landscape.
It's interesting. I had never thought about that. I mean, just prescribed burns. Okay, fine. In the spring, whatever. That's contrary to nature.
It really is.
I mean, the fires come in summer.
Yeah. I mean, you really don't. You can sense that there's a problem even if you're not a trained scientist. Just like. But it's like from the manager's point of view, they're trained to look at big trees, and also there's this big fear of fire that has infected the public at large, the politicians, and hence the managers. And so in the frenzy to deal with that fear, we're going to create a lot of problems for the future. But then, for managers, it's like a perpetual money machine. Management, you do get unintended consequences, and then you get more budget to fix that issue and make more problems. So just back off. Nature does it for free.
It's interesting. Quick question. Do you think the Forest Service being under Department of Agriculture, if they were put under Interior, the policy, mission, all that would be radically different?
I would hope so, but I think, maybe simply the term agriculture sort of precludes us, but I think they could, why not keep it in? You could potentially. It's just needs to change the mission. Whatever department that agency, is managed under, the mission needs to be, if people care about, the whole forest, all the wildlife, the watersheds especially, as time goes on, that's really going to be far more valuable than the lumber. Like the mission needs to change. If we're going to protect wildlife the way we see it today, it's going to have to happen on national public lands. There's just not enough private lands to do the job. And there's just this progressive like decline in the habitat value of these forests and the watershed function of the forest over time, the way it's being managed now. You know, my guess is when Gifford Pinchot first came up with the idea, it was, a historical fact is that the Forest Service was put in place to try to get a handle on this rampant logging. But granted, it's written into the law, you know, this multiple use idea. But they want to apply multiple use on every single acre is open to this myriad of multiple uses. Well, each acre has different suitability for starters, but I think in the long term their mission needs to change to do what can be done, you know. And it was in the original legislation, protecting watersheds is a part of the original mission. It just, you know, it's second fiddle to getting the cutout. It needs to become the lead goal. It needs to be to protect water, because as climate change continues, that's going to be, you know, clean, dependable water, which on this forest comes out of roadless areas and wilderness. That's far more valuable than you know, all the timber that they've removed to date, and especially going forward.